Welcome to the RotoWire Prospect Podcast. I'm your host, James Anderson, and we are brought to you by Rival Fantasy. And this week's guest, I've got Jesse Roche with me. We're going to talk about the Highlander Dynasty Invitational keeper selections, fan favorite number 2, and we've done some pods talking about the Highlander before. Jesse, with his law background, is much better at kind of going through the specific keeper designations than I am. So I'm going to let him kind of handle the explanation of the fan favorite. But first, Jesse, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Excited to talk about the Highlander Dynasty Invitational. Fantastic Dynasty adjacent format. Obviously, you mentioned keeper designation of fan favorite. We just had that deadline approach, and everyone had to designate one player. There were certain players that could not be designated. These are franchise players, basically the top. Your first 3 picks, your first 3 round picks, you could not designate them. And also any player selected in the Highlander draft, which is a 1-round draft that occurs in November. Those were the only players that could not be selected. Also, rookie eligible players could not be selected. I know that Michael Waterloo was biting his nails waiting for Masataka Yoshida to eclipse 130 at-bats on Sunday. He did, and we'll get to him, but he did designate him. So that's basic rundown. What this designation does is it protects these players from being poached in the offseason poacher drafts for 3 years. There will be up to 3 players designated. There's already been 2. This is the second one that each team has now designated. It's very difficult to trade these players. There's a steep penalty for trading them. So as you can imagine, there has been no trades of these players yet. I imagine that it could happen, and if anyone would pull it off, it'd probably be like Jordan Rosenblum at some point. I am very interested to see if he's able to do something like that. But again, very interesting selections. You're basically committing to this player for 3 years, and so you're going to often see a lot of younger players protected and not players in their 30s.
Yeah, and generally it probably skews more towards position players than pitchers, but we do have a decent amount of pitchers who have been designated. And I still sometimes I just marvel at Brett Sayer's ability to kind of come up with this constitution in the first place. Really, really impressive stuff. Incredibly creative league format, and I love it. And there's a chance Brett might join us in about an hour, but we'll see if that happens or not. Jesse and I are going to be running through team by team, and we're going to go in order of the standings. So we're going to start with the first place team, Akeem Glaspie. Last year, his fan favorite was Nolan Arenado, and this year, Jeremy Pena. Again, Akeem in first place by about a point right now. So you would be able to guess that his team is pretty stacked. What do you think about the Jeremy Pena selection there?
I mean, I think it was the right call. His other option was Will Smith, who's obviously having a fantastic season for the Dodgers. He ended up trading Will Smith for Luis Castillo and Tanner Bybee to kind of address pitching. Being in a win now position, it did make some sense. And catcher, if anything, is the deepest position in this league since there's only one starting catcher, 20-team league. There's a high replacement value at catcher, and he already had Eric Haas on his roster, who's been fine, perfectly acceptable, and high replacement value. So I thought that pivoting and trading Smith, who is 28 years old, for younger Pena as the fan favorite made a lot of sense. And I think that there's so much growth in Pena's game, growth potential in his game. And obviously he's having a solid season. I don't think it's necessarily wowing a lot of people. He's hitting 255, 301, 422 with 6 homers and 6 stolen bases. And if you go to like his StatCast, it's not necessarily going to pop off the page. There's a lot of like blue on his page, but we know that there's power there. He has big speed. He's an incredible athlete. He looks the part. He looks like a future stud. And there's very good bat-to-ball skill here too. 86% zone contact rate this year. I think that a lot of his struggles are due to his approach. He is very much aggressive. He swings outside the zone a lot. His chase contact rate is very poor, 43%. And I think that is the main reason we're not seeing the true breakout that maybe we thought could happen after his electric postseason. I still think that there's another level here for Jeremy Pena, and I thought it was a very strong selection. I thought it was honestly one of the better selections. Pena's just 25 years old. You're locking him up for his prime, basically, on a very good team. Big upside here for Pena.
Yeah, and this is batting average league, which is very important with Pena. He's I think I love him in batting average leagues, especially his speed has caught up to his power in part because of the new rules, and so I love him in batting average formats. And then Nolan Arenado is Akeem's fan favorite from last year, so he's going to get like the final good years of Nolan Arenado, most likely there.
Hopefully. I mean, it had been pretty dreadful to start this season. He's on a bit of a heater now, so hopefully Arenado turns it around. He's up to 263, 309, 443 with 8 home runs, so he's getting back on pace now. He goes through ups and downs. It's just sort of the hitter he's always been, and I don't really have too much worry about Arenado.
No, I don't either, especially just kind of over the next 2 years.
Yeah.
Now, second place team, Drew Sperling. He goes with Tyler Glasnow as his fan favorite too. His fan favorite from last year was Nick Castellanos. Sperling is right there, almost neck and neck with Akeem for first place. Glasnow, obviously, he's already injured, so there's that. But in theory, I mean, how healthy does he need to stay basically over the next 3 years to kind of pay off this selection, do you think?
Oh man. I think obviously this year, he's going to be back soon. He had another rehab start last night after a little bit of a scare when he only went 1 inning. The previous start was sitting just above 95 miles an hour as previous start. This was before the designation. So I'm sure that Andrew's breathing a sigh of relief after last night's start, which was electric, 4 innings, shutout ball, 9 strikeouts. His velocity was back consistent with what it usually is, averaging over 97 miles an hour with elite fastball shape. I think that a healthy Glasnow is one of the best pitchers in baseball. He arguably has the best stuff of any pitcher in baseball. He's basically Spencer Strider better than Spencer Strider in terms of pure stuff. His fastball has better characteristics to Strider. His breaking balls, I mean, he has 2, curve and slider. They're better than Strider's slider, I think, at least from a stuff plus perspective. And, obviously he has more viable pitches than Strider technically does. I mean, Strider's changeup's solid, but he doesn't throw it very often. So I'm comparing Glasnow to Strider because I think they're very similar arms, and I think that that's the upside we can see immediately from Glasnow if he's healthy, and that's a big if. To get value out of this selection from Glasnow, you're also buying his 29, 30, and 31 age years, which I'm not as concerned for pitchers, but for pitchers like Glasnow, that can be a little bit scary, for power arms like him, especially coming off injuries. I think that if you get 1 healthy year, or even 2 half healthy years, if it adds up to 1 healthy year from Glasnow, I think this is worth it, because that's elite production for half a year. You can then stash him on the IL if that's what happens, and then replacement value with what he could do, I think justifies his selection. For me, I think Glasnow's still a top 100 dynasty player, just because even if you give him a ton of risk, his stuff is so loud, and his command's not terrible, that it's just hard to push him out of the top 100 for me. I have him at 60, which may be aggressive considering, the injury history and his advancing age. But, I really think that he could be a top 5 starting pitcher as soon as next week, right? If he's back next week.
Yeah, I applaud the boldness to go with a guy with Glasnow's ceiling, and there's risk with most of these players we're going to talk about. There's some level of risk. I think if he just kind of averages 100 innings per year over this fan favorite designation, I think that's a win for Sperling. Now we move on to Ken Balderston in third place. His fan favorite last year was Logan Gilbert. He stays with the Mariners and designates Jared Kelenic as his fan favorite too. Kelenic obviously was a guy that would have could have gone in any direction coming into this year, and he's obviously trended way up.
Oh yeah, and Gilbert's in my mind also trending up. His secondaries have improved dramatically this year. The shape's changed, and I think that all of a sudden these secondaries for Gilbert, which were basically playing as average pitches, are all of a sudden plus pitches. The biggest issue with Gilbert is his fastball's kind of backed up a little bit, but if the fastball comes back even more like this, he could just explode even further. So I thought Gilbert is looking very good for him. Kelenic obviously has had a huge season. He's starting to slow, which I think many of us expected to a point.
Right.
And we need to really watch his splits against lefties. He's still mashing lefties. His performance against breaking balls and off speed pitches, which is starting to kind of slow. And a lot of the issues that they had in prior years are starting to kind of rear their ugly head again. That said, if he can keep the contact rate manageable, right now his zone contact rate 79.4%. His whiff rate is 28.1%. So those are fine if he can get to the power in games. Now, if it gets worse, if he struggles against breaking ball, it becomes he only becomes a fastball hitter, which is what he's been at the major league level before this year. If that's what happens, this could be a bit scary. Granted, what he's done this year is fantastic. 283, 331, 538 with 8 home runs and 6 stolen bases. He's a really tricky one to evaluate, in my opinion. I think that he has top 50 dynasty upside as soon as now. Honestly, I could see people putting him in that spot right now. I have him just outside of top 50, to be honest. But he's probably trending down slightly ever since my update, which was just a week ago. But I am a little bit concerned, but I think given the upside, his youth, I think it's a very worthwhile gamble.
He wasn't part of this fan favorite mix for any team, but how would you compare Kelenic versus Josh Lowe right now in Dynasty?
That's a good question. I easily prefer Kelenic. I think my concern with Lowe, and this is a player I do like, mind you, is the swing and miss. It's still kind of scary for me. His zone contact rate's around 75%, which is below average. It's always been that low. He isn't being played against lefties at all, basically. He hasn't really hit lefties at the major league level yet, and his usage is concerning. I think if you're going to be in a weekly locking format like this, if he's sitting against all lefties, which is what he's been doing this year, that limits his ultimate upside. But then again, it keeps his average in check, doesn't allow it to crater, keeps his performance hopefully on the upward trajectory. And maybe for some players, it doesn't hurt for them to get platooned, especially if they're strong side bats like Lowe. But because I think we're seeing Kelenic hit against lefties and play every day, and also hit in the middle of the order. I mean, I'm pretty sure Lowe is hitting like 6-7 in a very good Rays lineup, but still, I do prefer Kelenic by a good bit to Lowe.
Okay, now, yeah, I mean, they're closer for me, I think, but I definitely understand that case. And then, I mean, in this league, platoon bats are going to be in starting lineups, like strong side platoon bats,
especially outfielders.
Right. So there's no such thing as like, well, I have to sit this guy because he's sitting against lefties, but it does just cap just how high they can climb in terms of the counting stats.
Exactly.
Now, Eric Cross, the fourth team we're going to talk about here. This is maybe my favorite combo of fan favorites. It's so, kind of living life on the edge, but it's so much fun. He's got Shane McClanahan as his fan favorite from last year, and then Joe Ryan, he goes with another pitcher as his fan favorite from this year. I mean, I think he might be the only person with double pitchers as fan favorites. But you'd be hard pressed to find a better realistic duo if you're going to go with two pitchers.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, McClanahan is probably the best fan favorite selection of last year. I think there's maybe some arguments to be made about like Zach Gallen, which we'll talk about a little bit, but I think McClanahan stuff just is up there. I think that the big question is whether McClanahan or Strider are honestly the top dynasty starting pitcher. I have McClanahan as the top dynasty starting pitcher personally because of how much stuff he has and how good it is. It's ticked up even more this year, and he's proven to be healthy. They had a shoulder scare at the end of last year, so healthy McClanahan is elite. Joe Ryan is obviously kind of a conundrum. He's added a sweeper this year. It's kind of helped elevate his profile in general. Having a strong, it profiles from a Stuff Plus perspective as a plus pitch, but Stuff Plus also loves sweepers. So, you got to kind of like weigh that. But generally, having a breaker that is a legit, out pitch for him is kind of transformed his profile. Before his changeup and his not so great slider just were not truly viable. I guess they were maybe average pitches at the major league level. He was very much leaned heavily on his fastball. So adding the sweepers really elevated him to the next level. That said, his other choice he could have had here was Christian Javier. So for me, I thought that was an interesting selection to go Ryan over Javier, be given that, Javier, I think, has more upside. Obviously we saw a lot of it last year. I think that Javier's stuff personally, I think, is better than Ryan's, and he is a bit younger. So, and he's also performing. He's not necessarily performing as well as Ryan, but it's an interesting selection. Who would you have gone with, James?
I would have gone with Ryan. I'm such a big believer in his fastball with the characteristics. I mean, the fastball is also up almost a full tick from last year. I think he's so safe to me, especially just by starting pitcher standards. I mean, it's hard for me to buy the Javier has a higher ceiling than Ryan case that much when we're sort of seeing this is Joe Ryan's ceiling, and it's top 10 starting pitcher in the game, basically.
True. Yeah. I mean, I do think that what Ryan's done this year, his big changes really have elevated him into that conversation for sure.
So yeah, that's a really fun combo for Eric Cross, and he is in 4th place right now in the Highlander Dynasty Invitational. We will move on now to the 5th place team. That's Eddie Almaguer. His fan favorite last year, Tommy Edman, and this year, Matt Chapman. That's a fun just combo, just those two players that kind of complement each other fairly well. What do you think about the call on Chapman there from Eddie?
No, I liked it. I think that it's always a little risky going with 30-year-olds as fan favorites because decline happens. It happens starting around 30 generally. And I think that that's my biggest concern with Chapman. A lot of his production this year is because he's just barreling everything in sight. I think he leads Major League Baseball in barrel rate, and his power is the best he's had in his entire career. His hard hit rate, 65.4%. It's just absurd.
Yeah.
He's hitting everything on the nose. My big concern with Chapman, other than the age, is he only has 5 home runs despite all this hard contact. This is a player who has been a player he's hit 36 home runs way back in 2019, the year of the bouncy ball. But he does have that type of power. He's just hitting tons of doubles. He has 18 doubles this year. It's kind of driving his profile. His zone contact rate, while it was great early in the season, at least it had kind of rebounded to in my mind, his peak years, his 2018, 2019 years. It's fallen hard. It's down to 74.3%. I'm concerned about Matt Chapman. I think that there's still swing and miss there. It's just been there. And I think that the early production is just completely driven by the quality of his contact. And it's not sustainable. The quality of contact is not sustainable. It's going to come back. And if the home runs aren't coming like they have in the past, then the profile becomes a little problematic. That said, it's hard not to love how he's performed this year. He's on a great team, hitting in the middle of a very good lineup. Obviously, he's going to be in the lineup because he's a fantastic defensive player. But I do think that there's going to be heavy regression coming.
Yeah, I mean, monster regression coming for the batting average. The power, he's basically been 25 homers in the bank every year up until this year. I would tend to think he gets there again. So I would think that the home run power probably ticks up as the batting average takes a steep tumble down in the coming months. But it's kind of comparable to Akeem keeping Arenado last year. It's kind of the same logic to me, where you're just there's a nice high floor here with Chapman because of that defense. He's just in this league a guy who's playing every day and isn't just a Isaiah Kiner-Falefa caliber guy. There's a high enough floor there, I think, for Chapman, kind of like with Arenado, where even if there is a decline as he ages, you're at least getting that steady bat in the lineup every day.
Yeah, something like 240, 250 with 25 plus home runs is basically what I'd expect from Chapman. I wouldn't expect his average to be quite as bad as it's been, before this year, last couple of years. But there is risk, but obviously the floor is quite high, and obviously I think the ceiling is quite high. He's kind of flashing a little bit here, but I think there's more. Even if the average comes down to two, I think there's a chance he could be like a 260, 270 hitter with 30 home runs this year. He ends up that way. I'm actually I think it's surprising, to be honest, that he only has 5 home runs given the park dimension changes and his quantity of hard contact.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, that's the top 5 in the league. We're going to head to a quick break, a message from our sponsors, but when we come back, we'll take a look at the 6th place team, and that happens to be Jesse Roche. A new MLB season means it's time for a new kind of daily fantasy baseball. Rival Fantasy is the fantasy platform reinventing the way daily and weekly games are played, and they've brought new games to the ballpark this year that fantasy players won't find anywhere else. Rival Fantasy's games include Fantasy Bingo, head-to-head player challenges, and Fantasy Book, where users can select over-unders for 2 to 5 players. With games like this, daily fantasy has never been better. Right now, RotoWire listeners can get a $50 protected first play. That means if you win your first play, you keep your winnings. But if you lose your first entry, Rival Fantasy will fully refund you up to $50. Go to play.rivalfantasy.com/signup and use code RotoWire MLB at signup and deposit a minimum of $25 to get your first entry on Rival protected up to $50. Now is the time to step up to the plate and become a Rival today. Welcome to the arena. Baseball has always been America's pastime, but a close second is horse racing, and we've got the best way to get in on the action. StableDuel brings a new way to play the races, and this weekend they have over $20,000 in prizes for the Preakness Stakes. Select your team or your stable of horses and compete against other players for big money prizes. Watch your stable move up the leaderboard as your horses accumulate points based on where they finish in the race. Don't know anything about horse racing? Don't worry, the app has all you need to know with free data on each horse's record, as well as a risk, speed, and value number for choosing your best runners. This is the first game of its kind, and you don't want to miss out. Get in on the action and start perfecting your strategy. Download StableDuel app now and begin building your winning stable. Play, race, win with StableDuel. Download at StableDuel.com. All right, Jesse, we are up to your team, the 6th place team in the standings. Your fan favorite last year was Pablo Lopez, and I love your fan favorite this year, Bryan Reynolds.
Yeah, I thought that Reynolds was the clear option. 28 years old, having arguably a breakout season, and even though he's kind of slumped lately, he's still just hitting everything on the nose, hitting everything hard. His over the last, I guess, 10 days, he's not performed that well. He's gone 5 for 32, but his hard hit rate's 73.9%. In general this year, his hard hit rate's 55.2%. Everything's on the line. 5 home runs, 6 stolen bases. He's new rule changes. He's been running more, which he does have a little speed. I think that is a bit sustainable. I don't necessarily think he's going to be like a 20 stolen base player, but I could see him getting to like 10 to 15 for sure. And my big concern is, obviously he's slowed a bit. He is going to be 28. He's 28 now, so I'm buying his 28, 29, 30-year-old seasons, which I'm fine with. I think those are good productive seasons for a player like Reynolds. But I had other options I was considering. I had Logan Webb, who is sneakily having one of the best pitching seasons in all of baseball. He's among the pitching among the leaders in deserved run average, which is the metric over at Baseball Prospectus. He's pretty young. He's 26 years old. So I really did strongly consider Webb. I also have Thairo Estrada, who's had a huge season, but how sustainable his production is and could be, I'm a little leery of. I do think he is sort of a contact hitter that is kind of getting to power. I don't think there's a boatload of raw there. And I think the speed is sort of like I don't think he's going to be a player who steals 30 bases. He has 11 stolen bases now. I just don't see it. I see him more of like a 15 home run, 20 stolen base type player that hits like 270, and which is great. But I'm really kind of looking for somebody who's more stable, like Reynolds, who I think can be like a 280 hitter with 25 plus home runs and 10 to 15 stolen bases in a surprisingly solid Pirates team. So I thought Reynolds was the choice. I did almost trade him because I have these options, because I thought about Webb, but because I already have Pablo Lopez as a fan favorite, I didn't want to go pitcher. I thought that was a bit too risky. I think given that we do start 5 outfielders in this league, 20-team league, 5 starting outfielders, so 100 active outfielders, I thought it made sense to go with an outfielder like Reynolds as well, because there's a lot of scarcity in the outfield. So that was my decision. I almost traded him to Chris Vargas, who actually acquired Will Smith from Akeem. I almost did, but I decided that it made more sense, and Reynolds was more valuable to designate as a fan favorite.
Yeah, I think Reynolds actually is my favorite of all the FF2s. I think I've got him ranked. It's going to be close between him and Bellinger, but I've got him. I think I've got him ranked the highest. And my philosophy with the fan favorite selections is kind of, upside is absolutely something you want in any kind of selection like this, but floor to me is very important. I think Reynolds' floor is just about as high as it gets of any of the players we're talking about here. And another thing, you talked about the skills with him, the amount of times he's barreling the ball, how hard he's hitting the ball, the increase in speed. But he doesn't really miss time either, and I love that in Reynolds. He's not one of these guys that kind of comes with a long track record of injuries. So I really love the Reynolds selection by you.
Well, thank you.
Now we got Smata. His fan favorite one was Gleyber Torres. This year, going with Christian Yelich. I'm sure Smata would tell us that he's not like doing a huge celebration about making Yelich his fan favorite too, probably. But that contract is going to keep him in the lineup for at least the rest of this year, probably into next year. How much downside do you see with the Yelich selection from Smata?
Yeah, I mean, he's aging up. He'll be 32 years old later this year. I think selecting someone like this at this point in their career, he's very clearly on the downward trajectory of his career. Granted, almost as soon as he designated him as fan favorite, Yelich rewarded him with some monster games. He hit 3 home runs over the weekend. He's all of a sudden, he has 7 home runs and 9 stolen bases. He continues to make hard contact. He always has. He continues to hit everything on the ground. He always has, except for that one year in 2019. I don't hate it. It was definitely better than his initial selection, which was Rhys Hoskins, who I think is borderline rosterable, to be honest, in a lot of dynasty formats, because I question whether even Hoskins is going to find a full-time job next year, coming off of serious injury as a righty first baseman with declining production. So Yelich, I think, was probably the most rational decision. I think that he's a player who gets underrated in fantasy because his home run and stolen base production hasn't really popped the last few years, but he surprisingly produces because he scores a lot of runs. He already has over 30 home runs this year. He scores a lot of runs. He gets on base, and he gets enough home run and stolen base production to be an asset. So I don't hate it, but obviously at his stage in his career, it is a risk. He is under contract for a while,
Yeah.
a long time. So I think that it's safe in a way, in much the same way as Arenado is, but I think that it's one of those selections that I think isn't going to pay dividends in year 3.
Yeah, I mean, it might have been that weekend series that did it, but Yelich's ground ball rate down below 53%, which for him is actually pretty solid. He was over 58% last year, so if he can just kind of keep the ground balls around, half the time, we don't want to set our sights too high with Yelich there, but yeah, I mean, he's very, very solid, and better in OBP than batting average, but still a guy who's going to hit around 250. Okay, Kevin Hastings here. This one, he probably understands as well as we do that this one probably not one of the best fan favorites, but his fan favorite last year, Ty France. His fan favorite this year, Taylor Walls. Walls certainly has more value in this league than he might in some of your home leagues or your shallower dynasty or keeper leagues. But what do you think about Taylor Walls just in general?
I think a lot of what we've seen from him is fluky. He has 7 home runs. His max exit velocity is a 104.8. He just doesn't have a lot of power. He's never had a lot of power. I think that he's a true talent, like 10-ish home run hitter. The fact that he's already at 7 is just raised magic. This year's just been a magical season. Everyone's producing. I think that this is not at all sustainable for Walls. That said, I do think he's going to be a pretty, he's going to get semi-regular playing time because of his defensive value. He's a very good defensive player. He plays all over the infield. He does make a lot of contact. So in much the same way I talked about with Dario Estrada, Walls is not a power hitter. He's not going to hit for power. He has less power than Estrada. And I think the power is not sustainable. I think the speed, he does have speed. So he has 7 stolen bases. I think that he could be a guy who gets to 10 homers and 15 plus stolen bases. But I think a lot of it's just not a profile I love. I was actually surprised when he was designated as a fan favorite. I thought there were better options on the team. I love Hunter Brown. I thought Hunter Brown would have been my selection. He also has Ryan Helsley, and I think that there hasn't been many closers designated as a fan favorite. And I know Helsley is kind of almost in a timeshare right now in St. Louis, so that would have been another potential option, but I would have probably designated Brown. I get not wanting to go with a pitcher because of the risk involved. Pitchers break. We've seen a lot of that this year, but Hunter Brown's, I think, a special talent on a very good team in a great organization, and he would have been my pick.
Yeah, I would have gone with Brown as well. Obviously some risk there, but I think that's probably a situation where you kind of go big, roll the dice with Brown. To Wall's credit, he's swinging significantly more in the zone this year than last year, which combined with the contact rate is good for him. My general philosophy with these is kind of, I want it, if whenever possible, I want kind of a pre-prime or a prime hitter in their 20s that can just kind of be part of my lineup going forward. And I think Walls clears the bar of a guy that you're never going to regret having in your lineup in this league. So,
yeah, but he's also a player who has a very low floor, and
yes.
Obviously, I think getting high floor options is a great idea, like you already said, and that would be my biggest concern with Walls, is that the floor is what he's been.
Right.
It's not like he's a super high contact hitter either. It's his bat to ball skills are kind of average, and he scares me. I think that he's a fine player. The other thing that I think we should have considered here is that Walls is technically eligible. He could have been kept as an underdog,
yes.
which is the next designation. That, I think, should have been a consideration. There's one other player who was kept as a fan favorite that could have been kept as an underdog, and we'll get to that player. I think you could have waited a month to see how sustainable this production is. and then just made the decision on Walls. That's a thing that kind of like bothered me a little, I think, about this selection. But I don't I understand it for the reasons that you've mentioned about hitting depth in this league is a serious issue, and Walls' versatility and his obviously production to date obviously has a lot of value.
Yeah, the underdog designation was almost created for a player like Taylor Walls.
Yeah,
very, very much of an underdog.
I mean, Walls is not an everyday player, which is scary.
Now, Michael Waterloo, as you mentioned, sweating out the Masataka Yoshida rookie eligibility factor with his designation. He was able to keep Yoshida to pair with Key Brian Hayes, who was his fan favorite from last year. I was pretty agnostic with Yoshida coming into the year. I didn't draft him anywhere. I just wasn't really willing to kind of trust in Chaim Bloom in this scenario, and I don't really buy the translations projection wise in terms of how reliable those can be. But so far, he's completely paid off anyone who even considered getting involved with Yoshida this year.
Yeah, I have a lot of shares of Yoshida. I was actually, I was considering him. I initially had the first overall pick in the preseason draft, and I was probably going to be taking Jackson Holiday with that pick, but I ended up trading that pick. And honestly, in retrospect, it could have been Holiday, it could have been Yoshida. Those may have been better than the trade I ended up making, which I liked a lot, and I got Walker Buehler out of that deal. But right now, in hindsight being 2020, it's not looking great. And Yoshida obviously has been fantastic. He's hit 301, 381, 507. He's been red hot of late. He's up to 6 home runs. The thing that's really surprised me with Yoshida is how much power he's getting to. I just did not expect that at all. This is not a big guy. He's listed at 5'8", 176. I knew the bat to ball was going to be very good, and it's been very good. His zone contact rate's 85.2%. His strikeout rate's below 10%. He's one of the rare players in all of baseball that is an elite contact hitter with what's looking like above to plus power. And I just don't think many people expected the power to play like this. And even from the data we had from Nippon Professional Baseball, the power wasn't like this over there. So I think it's sort of a shock in a way. And I'm loving it, to be honest. I love that he's able to produce this way. That said, I thought that Waterloo would have been fine even if Yoshida did not get up to 131 at bats. He had Josh Young, who I thought would have been a very good pivot. He had technically as Kyle Schwarber, who is over 30 years old, but we've seen his production over the years, and I think he could have been a good selection as well. Plus, Yoshida is technically eligible as an underdog, so he could have kept him as an underdog as well. But I definitely understand it. He's obviously showing that he's an elite player. I think he's a borderline, if not already, a top 100 dynasty player right now.
Yeah, my guess kind of coming into the year was that he was going to be like Steven Kwan without the speed. And he's like, I would have projected basically around 6 homers and 2 steals for Yoshida on the season. And he's already got the 6 homers and 2 steals.
I thought he was Alex Verdugo. That's who I thought he was. And of course, Alex Verdugo is basically matching him. They have very similar production this year. That's who I thought he was. And I thought that's why I actually do have a lot of shares of Yoshida, because I thought he was undervalued for a long time. But, he's been better than I expected. He still does put a lot of balls on the ground. He is a hit over power bat. So I think that the power production he's shown to date, I think may slow. But I do think he could get up to 15 plus home runs over the course of the year and he'd be a 300 hitter, which has a ton of value.
All right. The itch will be next. He won the league last year, obviously, and his fan favorite selection this year, Nathaniel Lowe. Last year, Edwin Diaz. We know that hasn't aged very well, but I don't think you can point to the way Diaz got injured as something like, it's not like his elbow started barking, which you would have assumed would have been the case if you knew he was going to miss a year. But Nathaniel Lowe, pretty solid.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking for high floor bats, and that's exactly what Lowe is. He's maybe not producing as he was in the second half last year, but he's hitting 265, 346, 446 with lots of run production in a very good Texas Rangers lineup. And, I think that there's more. Obviously, we've seen more from him. I think that he could get to more. So I thought that he's a very good selection, just 27 years old. So you're getting the middle of his prime years. Right. I thought the other option he had up, and he got maybe a fortunate save here because he had Drew Rasmussen, who I legit thought would have been a good selection. Granted, since he already has Edwin Diaz, I don't know if he would have gone arm-arm. But Rasmussen, the news about his injury came out before the deadline, before he even let the league know who his fan favorite would be. So I don't know if he would have gone with Rasmussen. Obviously, Rasmussen was having an electric season, showing 3 pitches that were plus or better offerings. He was really breaking out in a big way, and his injury is very unfortunate, but maybe the timing of it may have been fortunate for the itch.
Yeah, and the thing I love, you mentioned it kind of with the Lowe selection, just the fact that he turns 28 in July, so he's getting just the exact years you'd want from Lowe. And then when this fan favorite tag expires, that's basically going to be the beginning of the Nathaniel Lowe decline. So
exactly,
works out well for the itch. Jordan Rosenblum caught a little heat last year for his Joey Gallo fan favorite selection. He takes a closer this time around, Josh Hader. I think that's one of the more interesting fan favorite selections here because he is the first closer of the bunch, and just kind of comes down to how long is Josh Hader going to stay healthy. For as long as he's healthy, it's going to be a good selection.
Yeah, this is a saves only league, and a 20-team league, so closers are a highly sought after commodity, and especially elite closers. And Josh Hader has returned to his elite status. I think that his production's not quite his surface level production. So his ERA, his WHIP, I think it's kind of overstating how good he's actually been. I don't think he's been as good as he's made out to be. I know that his deserved run average is around 4, so which is a big difference from what his ERA is, which is 1. So that said, he's a locked-in closer. He's 29 years old. Closer age kind of doesn't matter at all for the most part, and he's been an established closer for years and years and years. So as long as he's healthy, I think that it's going to pay off.
Right. It's really just the health. Like his performance would have to decline so much for him to not be a closer somewhere. We've kind of seen that with like the Kenleys and Kimbrels, and you have to kind of get to Craig Kimbrel last year level bad to stop saving games. Okay. Chris Vargas, aforementioned, he trades for Will Smith as his fan favorite, and last year his fan favorite was George Springer. What were his options? How badly do you think he needed Will Smith here?
Oh, he needed it badly. I think he designated Bryson Stott before he ended up making this trade, and I'm not very high on Bryson Stott. I think he's a fine fantasy option, but I think his upside is quite limited. I think he's sort of like a 270, 10-10 type player, and which is in a league like this, that will work. But getting a player like Will Smith, who is an elite catcher, in his prime, 28 years old, having a career year so far, he's hitting 323, 412, 613 with 7 home runs. One of the rare catchers who just hits in the middle of a very good lineup with the Dodgers. So I thought it was fantastic. I personally think Will Smith was one of the better options. I already talked about catcher value in this league. So yes, there is a high replacement value at catcher. And I understand maybe what Akeem did in terms of trading Will Smith and going with Jeremy Pena. But I still think Will Smith's just such an elite player. he makes hard contact. His strikeout to walk ratio this year is wild. He has 8 strikeouts to 16 walks. Is only 25 games. He hasn't. He's been off injured this year, but he's had a. I think he's transformed in a lot of ways. This is a player who has been a high contact hitter for a long time, but this year his zone contact rate has jumped 9 percentage points up to 93%. His contact rate is 88.5%. It's just wild. You never see this out of a power hitter like Will Smith. And, if anything, I think there's a good question about whether him or Adley are the top dynasty catching prospect. And I would not fault anybody for choosing Will Smith.
Yeah, I thought, I love Smith coming into the year. Didn't even need to break out, I didn't think, to kind of pay off the price tag necessarily. And he has. We were all, at least I always kind of looked at Will Smith as kind of really good, like with his current skills, but there was enough there where you could see another level, but you couldn't really bank on another level. And as you said, it does seem like he has maybe taken that next level. The concussion, hopefully that's the last we ever hear of that with him. I hate it when catchers, start dealing with concussions on a semi-regular basis. So hopefully that's just a thing in the rearview mirror that we'll never have to have him deal with again. But I'm with you. I mean, I think it's tough to bet against Adley at catcher, but I think it undersells how special Will Smith is to say that it's clearly Adley in Dynasty.
I I do prefer Adley in Dynasty, but I think that the gap is close.
All right, now Alex Sanchez, his fan favorite last year was Max Fried, and his fan favorite this year, James Outman. Outman, would he have been eligible as an underdog, or?
Yes, he would have been. This is I forgot about Yoshida being one of those players, but Outman is the other one I was thinking about earlier as a player that you could have waited to see if this production is sustainable for him over another month, which is, I think, for a player like Outman, I think that makes a lot of sense because of the swing and miss. The swing and miss is extreme. His zone contact rate's among the worst in all of baseball at 69%. And the whiff rate, or the contact rate in general, is like 60%, which is atrocious. So it's just a very scary profile to me. I think the power is legit. He's definitely above the plus power. He gets to a lot of it in games because he has a leveraged approach that is designed almost to hit pull side home runs. And he has legit speed too. So I think the power and speed is there, but the swing and miss is so scary. And it's the Dodgers, who's to say that he won't move into a strong side platoon role or a fourth outfielder role even at some point. And that's what concerns me with Outman. I understand the designation because the power and speed is, in my mind, special, and his production has been great. Dodgers have been rolling him out every day, and he has held his own against lefties. He's produced against lefties. So I think that, and his defense has been solid enough, I think, that to keep him in the lineup. Dodgers don't really have any other options for center field. So I do think that there is a lot of runway for Outman's profile to regress before he, gets reserved at all for the Dodgers. But I do think he's probably a true talent, like 220 hitter, which, isn't ideal.
Yeah. XBA is 227, and projections pretty much, Bad X has him 231. Now, they weren't high on him coming into the year, obviously, but the nice thing about Outman is he's 26, so you're getting, in theory, basically his best years here. So it's not the best, but it's far from the worst.
He also had Josh Lowe as an option, who we've already talked about. I thought
I would have gone Lowe.
Yeah, I thought it was a close call. I think I definitely would understand preference for Lowe because I don't think the swing miss is nearly as extreme. I think there's more power with Lowe, and I think there's more speed. So, and he's younger, so a lot of good things for Lowe. It's just usage, right? Lowe's not an everyday player, which I think is part of the thing. Lowe's also eligible as an underdog, but the person who I may have gone with was Dustin May, who he still has. I know that a lot of the metrics don't love May. This is a player who has not missed a lot of bats this year. He only has 32 strikeouts in 47 innings, but he's 25 years old, and his stuff is among the best in all of baseball. I think that he's one of the rare players who I'd be willing to bet on to outperform, his like deserved run average, to outperform his FIP, to outperform his Sierra, to outperform all the things that all the metrics that say he should be doing a lot worse, because he is such a heavy ground ball pitcher. He's, in a lot of ways, it's like Logan Webb, in that I think that we should look past some of the, I guess, advanced metrics when you're looking at these types of unique arms. And I really do think May is a guy I'd be willing to bet on to even take another step forward. I mean, he's a pitcher who has on Stuff Plus, all right, his four-seamer is 116, his sinker is 116, his cutter is 112, his curveball is 145, which is absolutely elite, one of the best curveballs in all of baseball. I mean, you're not going to find that kind of stuff out there for many pitchers at all. So May's a guy I think that, yes, he's likely not what he's done so far, which is 2.68 ERA and a 0.94 whip, isn't likely not representative of how he actually pitched. But I do think that there's another level here, a big another level here for May.
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned Logan Webb, but like, where do you sort of see Dustin May's strikeout rate kind of sitting, say, like next year? Because he's down kind of in, near the bottom of the league, basically at 17.5% right now. But we saw with Logan Webb, he kind of had a dip last year, and he's back up to where he was in 2021. Do you see do you see Dustin May kind of getting up to sort of mid 20s in strikeout percentage?
I don't think so. I don't think that's the type of pitcher he is. I think he's maybe could get to low 20s. I just don't think he's going to be a guy who's going to be like 10K per nine at all, because his pitches are not designed necessarily to miss bats. He has a big sweeping curveball that is designated as a curveball, but it's likely a sweeper under the new Statcast designations. It's got special shape in much the same way as like Julio Urias. His curveball, his sweeper, it's not a big bat misser. Same thing with Dustin May. They're there to induce weak contact. And he does throw a sinker a lot. And I think that if he adjusted his usage to go more four-seamer rather than sinker, I think there's a chance we could see an uptick in strikeout rate. But he hasn't done that. I mean, there was hints of it in the past, but he has, upped his four-seam usage ever so slightly every single year. I mean, last year it was at 23.2%. This year it's at 27.2%. So it's trending up, but he still does lean heavily on that sinker, and the sinkers generally just don't miss bats. There are very rare sinker designations that actually miss bats. Someone like a Kyle Harrison, who technically throws a sinker, but it has four-seam traits, and that's a bat-missing pitch, but not Dustin May. Dustin May's sinker is designed to induce ground balls. Because of that, I just don't think he's going to be a big bat-missing pitcher, but I don't think that we should care a ton about that, because I think the ratios are always going to be fantastic. I think, we always consistently sleep on someone like Julio Urias, who consistently performs despite, everything telling us he shouldn't. And I think that's what Dustin May is.
Yeah. And there's a fifth pitching category, the wins category.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a big one for Dustin May.
Oh, yeah.
We're working our way down the standings here in the Highlander Dynasty Invitational. Up next, DJ Short. Last year's fan favorite selection was Alec Boehm. This year, Nico Hoerner. Kind of a similar type of a selection here, just a young big league hitter with a decently high floor. What do you think about the Hoerner selection?
I thought it was the right selection. I think Nico Hoerner lacks like a boatload of upside, because it is very much a hit over power profile. He does not have a lot of power. He has enough that I think he can get to 10 home runs any given year. He kind of reminds me of, he's like a Tommy Edman type, which we know has a lot of fantasy value. So I think locking Hoerner up for 3 years, he's just 26 years old. He has absolutely elite bat to ball ability. And the speed is translating really well this year. It's 12 stolen bases. They're letting him run wild. Even if the power isn't loud or he doesn't really get to it in games, I think he can still be a very valuable player.
Yeah, I mean, you said Tommy Edman. I was kind of thinking shades of like Whit Merrifield.
Yeah.
And that there's a shelf life for that skill set. But Hoerner just turned 26. Just as an aside, what do you think about Christopher Morel for Dynasty?
I say sell. If you have Morel right now, given his recent heater, he has such extreme swing and miss issues. I mentioned the issues that Outman has, but Morel's even worse. Morel, if he was eligible, would have easily the worst zone contact rate, I think, in all of baseball. Same as last year. I mean, it's around 65% generally, and it was like that in AAA too. The power is very real. I mean, he's a fun player. He'll get to power. He has some speed, but man, the contact issues he has are just scary.
Yeah, he's really flying close to the sun right now.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to Chris Clegg. Last year, his fan favorite was Joe Musgrove, and this year, Cody Bellinger. I think per my last Dynasty rankings update, Bellinger might be the highest ranked of all the fan favorite selections. I think it'd be close if I were re-ranking today, but how much are you buying in on the Cody Bellinger we've seen in 2023?
I think there's a lot of things that I'm remain concerned about with Bellinger. I think that, the power has never been loud. It's never been the type of power that really supports his production. I think it's very squarely average raw power that he gets to a ton in games because he has great pull side power. He gets to it all, and then some. So I think that while I think he is going to still hit for home runs, I don't think that he's going to be like a 30 home run hitter anymore. I do think he can be 20 plus very easily. The thing that I think is the most sustainable thing about his entire profile is the speed. I mean, Cody Bellinger's fast. He's always been fast. And I think that they're letting him run loose in Chicago right now. Chicago's letting everyone run loose. And I think if he continues to run, then he's a 2020 player. I think I think he's a fairly safe 2020 player. That said, I think that the average is probably going to come down. I think that he has benefited. He's one of the prime beneficiaries of the new shift rules. And I think that he is still a player that can hit like 250, 2020. But I'm not really buying in fully. I have him at 76 in my rankings. So I do think this is a fantastic selection. He's one of the best in my mind of all the players that have been selected. But I do think that he's due for some regression. He is 27, so he's getting locked up for prime years. I would say probably Cody Bellinger's prime was years ago, but I think we're still getting very good years of his production, and the change of scenery has done wonders for him.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see where he ends up in the off season. I definitely think the change of scenery was excellent for him, and then it just kind of becomes sort of where is his next change of scenery? Does he stay in Chicago?
Yeah.
So let's go now to Drew Wheeler, his fan favorite last year, right up there as one of the best, Zach Gallen. And this year he goes with JT Realmuto. Certainly a older selection among the fan favorite selections. And then when you throw in that Realmuto is a catcher, kind of gets emphasized his age, but he's still very productive. How do you see that fan favorite designation aging?
I do not think it's going to age well. That said, I don't dislike it. He's still very athletic. He's, probably one of the more athletic catchers in all of baseball. So I think his profile should age better than maybe some. But that also comes with a risk because you are attaching value to his stolen bases, and he has 7 of them this year. And if the speed backs up as he ages, then, and the stolen bases start to dry up, then all of a sudden his profile changes dramatically for fantasy purposes. But I do understand it. He is hitting 299 with those 7 stolen bases and 3 home runs. He's been one of the most consistent performers in all of baseball. As a catcher, I think he's been top 3 basically for the last decade, almost every single year. Decade's the wrong amount of time, but it's been about 5 or 6 years. And if you're looking for floor and stability, I think that despite his age, I think it's a very fine selection. I think of the options that Drew had, I thought that he was probably the best option.
Yeah, I mean, I'm never going to bet against Realmuto on sort of a month-to-month basis, or sort of like I'm never going to. I don't think I'm going to decide necessarily before a draft season. Mm-hmm. This is the year that it's going to all fall apart for Realmuto, unless we sort of see some kind of clear signs of that. But you'd have to imagine, at least towards the end of this, it's not looking that great. But I mean, you could do a lot worse, and the now value is absolutely there. All right, Chris Mayer, the Baseball Pods Twitter account. Chris had Astros Luis Garcia as his fan favorite last year, which kind of example of the pitfalls of going with a pitcher. And then Jorge Polanco as his fan favorite this year.
Yeah, it's a bummer with what happened with Luis Garcia, but that's exactly right. You don't want 2 pitchers for that reason, partly. And even just one pitcher can be a little bit nerve-wracking and scary. I mean, I had Pablo Lopez, and I'm just like, please be healthy. Please. I'm liking what I'm getting from him this year, but I don't love Jorge Polanco as a selection. I don't think he had a lot of great options for this designation, so I understand why he went Polanco. Polanco's obviously been injured. I think how these injuries, I think, are starting to pile up for Polanco. He's aging up. He's, I believe, 29. He's going to be 30 soon. I just don't know how impactful he's going to ultimately be over the course of these 3 years. And I think that there's a chance, if it does crater for him in any way, shape, or form, that it just completely falls apart, which is my concern with him. Since he's returned to action, he's produced, though, I will say. He's at 283, 327, 489 with 4 home runs. A lot of what he's done is he's barreled a ton of balls, 14.7% barrel rate. He's made a good amount of hard contact. A lot of the underlying skills are solid for Polanco, but I think my biggest concern with him would be the injury track record.
Yeah, and the Twins have some pretty nice depth behind him, so I think at some point before the end of that fan favorite designation, they'll have kind of moved on to something else there. But Polanco could be a top 200-ish fantasy option for the next 2.5 years or so. So we'll see about that one. Let's see here. I'm going to jump to. We might be able to get Brett on. I'm going to jump to Jeff Ponce quick. He is second to last in the standings. Brett is third to last. I am last. Ponce had Kevin Gausman as his fan favorite last year. That's obviously worked out very well. And then this year he goes with Jonathan India, who hasn't hit for much power, but at least he's running.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit of a rebound year, obviously, for India. I think that he's not hit for a lot of over-the-fence power, but he is hitting for easily the most hard contact of his entire career. His hard hit rate's up to 43.7% this year, which is 5 percentage points better than it was in his breakthrough 2021 season. So I think it's great to see him getting to power in games, making a lot of hard contact. I think the home runs will come. I don't think that it's like a ton of home runs, but I think he can be 15 to 20. He can be a lot like what he was in 2021. And I think this is a huge rebound season for him. And again, you mentioned the speed. He has 8 stolen bases. I think, if anything, I don't think that's going to be the most sustainable thing. I do think he's a double-digit stolen base player long term, and I think that the new rule changes are certainly helping India. But I think the thing I'm really focused on with India is the power, is the contact rate improvement. His zone contact rate's 88.2%. He has an elite plate discipline too. I think what we're seeing with India is everything we hope from him in 2021, and I don't think people are really fully there in terms of buying back in. So I really do like this destination. I think you're getting a prime player. He's 26 years old. You're getting you're getting great years from India. He's in a fantastic ballpark. I think it's a very good selection.
Yeah, this is the exact type of hitter that I really love giving this designation to, where it's early prime. They're going to play a lot.
Yep.
Just someone that each year, this is a guy I'm leaving in my lineup. I just never even have to think about it. Where did you end up ranking India among all dynasty players?
I think he's just outside my top 100.
Okay.
I think
that's kind of where I have him too. I think like mid 100s, something like that.
Yeah, I think that in OBP, he's a guy like which your rankings are, I would probably even rank him higher. Let me see where I had him. I had him at 95 actually. My most recent update was on the 12th, so last Friday. I think yours was a little
mine's
like
a little
something.
older than that.
Yeah, a little older.
Yeah. So yeah, great pick by Jeff. We do have Brett now. Brett, are you with me? Thanks for joining us.
What's up? How's it going?
Great to have you here. The mastermind behind the Highlander Dynasty Invitational and these fan favorite designations. Was just kind of marveling earlier in the show again about just how you came up with this league. Very, very fun. Your fan favorite designation last year was Andrew Vaughn. This year you went with Nolan Gorman. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, hopefully this one goes a little bit better than the last one. I still think I still like Vaughn a lot, and honestly, there are some similarities between Gorman and Vaughn. I mean, Vaughn just I cough if you heard this 50 times, but Vaughn needs to hit the ball in the air a little bit more. It's not that he doesn't hit the ball hard; he just doesn't quite. He doesn't have the over the fence power that he should. And if he can bump up that launch angle, some of those grounders will turn into line drives also and help the batting average. So I still think there's a lot of upside for him compared to what he's doing now as like a 260, 270 hitter with 25 homers. I think that's about his ceiling at this point, though. Gorman hits the ball even harder, and he hits the ball in the air more. He's had a really nice start to the season, and I really like the way he's kind of angled for playing time in St. Louis. It's been a little bit of a slog getting into that lineup on a regular basis, but he's there in a prime spot, and I don't think he's going anywhere.
No, I think the Gorman, this has gone about as well as anyone could have hoped, I think, for 2023, as far as Nolan Gorman's concerned, because of the playing time hurdles that he had to kind of get through. He's played his way into being a big part of that team. How close do you have Gorman and Vaughn right now for Dynasty? Because they're, as you said, they are sort of trending in different directions, but very similar high pedigree guys.
Yeah, I have them pretty close. I think Gorman's clearly taken a step forward, but I mean, we're also only 6 weeks removed from him being. I mean, I got him as a reserve pick in tout mix in the middle of March, and that's an OBP league. So there are lingering questions there as to whether he can keep up this pace, and this pace is probably not overly sustainable, but he's also running a little bit, which is kind of nice. He, especially in St. Louis, he could finish with 10 steals, which is not insignificant. But I think at this point, I have Gorman kind of tipped over Vaughn at this point, but they're relatively close, and I just they are definitely going in opposite directions, because that was not particularly close at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, I have Gorman one spot ahead of Vaughn.
There you
Exactly. So yeah, I think that the big issues with Gorman are a lot of the same issues that we already discussed with Josh Lowe, in that there is very real swing miss issues with Gorman, and he doesn't play against lefties. But again, same with Lowe. That's fine if he's going to play against lefties and be a disaster. We don't want him to play against lefties, even if it does reduce his potential impact. Obviously, even to date, it hasn't really been a huge issue. He has 10 home runs and 33 RBIs. That's huge out of second base. The power, like you said, is very real, and his swing path is designed to get to that power. His average launch angle is over 20 degrees. So that's what he is. I think the average is going to come down hard, but I think he can still be a guy who hits like 240 and gets 30 home runs at second base, and that's got a lot of value.
Yeah, I think I think he hits the ball hard enough, even with the swing and miss, that I think the batting average can hew a little higher than that. I think he could kind of sneak up to the 260 range. He's going to have to continue to make progress with the swing and miss, but I mean, he does not have a ton of major league experience at his back. He will. I believe he will get a little bit better at that. But no, the average is definitely over his head right now. I thought I was going to have an interesting decision, and then I ended up not, because the other player I was thinking about ended up about 10 at bats short of being able to be selected with the pick. But I'm curious to ask you guys. So I'd been kind of toggling back and forth mentally between Nolan Gorman and Brett Baty, and Baty ended up not being able to be picked for this. I think I really like Baty, but if they were both available, who would you guys have picked for this?
I went with Baty.
Yeah, I would have gone with Baty. But I do I mean, look, like I love. Like, Nolan Gorman has surpassed my expectations basically every of the past 2 or 3 years, and he's just turned 23. And so I love it when a guy that young just keeps doing more than I'm expecting them to do. So, I mean, I think the Gorman one is great, but I mean, I would have gone with Baty.
Yeah, it was a bummer. I think I would have too, but yeah, that's.
I mean, Gorman's still a great pick. I think it's close, and we have production from Gorman, and if the production continues, if he starts getting playing time against lefties, if he can kind of manage the extreme fly ball nature of his profile and his whiff issues and still hit for average, he could really explode up rankings. We could see him easily being like a top 100 dynasty player in short order if he can manage all that. But I do think there obviously is risk, but I think like what James has talked about in the podcast is you want to get these types of young position players with, with fantasy impact locked up. And I think Gorman's definitely qualifies as one of those players.
Yeah, I would not have, if Gorman were not on my roster, I would have a very, very hard time picking someone for this. Because as you both know, my roster skews towards the prospects. So it's rough sledding beyond that, but Gorman did enough that I'm happy with it.
Are you looking forward to your underdog selection, Brett?
I am looking forward to my underdog selection, and I'm also now that Matt McLain is up in the majors, I am going to have to start thinking about who I'm going to designate as my next rising star once he eclipses his eligibility. So I was, I have not gotten off the Matt McLain train, even though, Jesse, I know you jumped off to save your life about
I never jumped that far off. No, I think I was like the highest. I think I ranked him higher than just about anybody coming into the season, and I probably not higher than you, of course. But no, obviously his production in AAA has been fantastic. It was fantastic. And we'll have to see how he does at the major league level. I think the power has really shown through this year. The contact has ticked up. The speed is, consistently good. So it'll be fun to see. I'm really excited to see how he produces at the major league level. There is still enough underlying swing and miss that I'm a little bit concerned, but I mean, you can deal with it if he continues to barrel the ball, if he continues to put balls over the fence and steal bases. And he's in a great situation.
He is, because everyone sucks on that team, at least for now. But yeah, as long as he runs, you can handle this. You can handle both the swing and miss, and you can handle him not kind of making the most of his power once he's kind of established in Cincy.
Yep.
That is Brett Sayre, our good buddy, President CEO, Baseball Prospectus. I was the one who jumped off the Matt McLain train.
There was many people who did. Many.
I think almost everybody jumped off the Matt McLain train.
But really appreciate you joining us, Brett. Do you want to stay on for the analysis of mine, or do you want to jump off?
Yeah, I'll hang on and talk about yours.
All right. So last place team, yours truly. Willy Adames was my fan favorite last year. Miguel Vargas, my fan favorite this year. And like Brett, I kind of needed Miguel Vargas to be eligible for this because I thought there was a pretty big drop off between him and my next best option, but he does kind of fit exactly what I'm looking for with a kind of a pre-prime big leaguer who I can just leave in my lineup indefinitely. I don't know if any of you guys have thoughts on the Vargas selection.
No, I think there's a lot of similarities. I think there's a lot of similarities between Vargas and Gorman in that, it's they're not the same type of hitter, but the playing time situation has worked out well for Vargas, and I think better than kind of the median expectation there. I think there's more. There are more players. There are probably more players, sadly, around Gorman in St. Louis than there are around Vargas in LA, especially after Lux's injury. But he's certainly on the way to establishing himself as a very good major league hitter, and I like that bet.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with Vargas is getting the power in games more consistently, and he's starting to do that a bit more. His numbers don't necessarily jump off the page, and his exit velocities are not loud, and they were not necessarily loud in AAA either. But I do think he's going to be a player who's going to hit a lot of line drives, be all fields batter. He's going to be, I think, a guy who can provide a strong average. I think that the average right now, which is at 225, is going to go up substantially. I think he's a player who, at peak could be a 270, 280 hitter with 20 plus home runs and double digit stolen bases, which has a ton of value, especially at second base.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm hoping for, is just kind of in his prime, like 275, 20 to 25 homers with 10 steals is kind of exactly what I'm hoping for with Vargas.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's going to do it for us. Brett, any thoughts before we let you go on just all the fan favorite selections and just how the Highlanders going this year?
No, I consistently enjoy watching this league kind of unfold, and these I love the fact that we have all these like deadlines throughout the season, so that everyone can kind of have stuff to talk about, and we got another one in a month. It's just fun, man. I like it.
I can't wait for the underdog. I think is my favorite of the three.
It's going to be wild.
It's going to be insane. I have a short list of guys I'm considering, and they are all over the friggin' map. So, we'll see.
Yeah, with the underdog designation, you're going to see a lot of prospects get designated. I think in particular this year, I think the way it's working is there's just less of a pool to pick from. So I think it's going to be definitely a lot of very interesting designations. I am in a particular pickle because I had no keepers after the redistribution draft because of the way that our invisible hand bidding for draft position worked out. So I have very limited options for the underdog. So I'm very motivated to potentially trade for a player that could fill that role for me.
Yeah, I want to I like giving kind of underdogs the underdog tag, which I kind of did with Jake Berger last year. So I have some slight temptations to lean Jesus Sanchez with my underdog tag, but I don't think I'll be able to pass up putting Junior Caminero in that underdog slot.
Yeah, I thought that's what I have designated for you right now.
that seems like pretty much a no-brainer to me. I mean, he's been phenomenal this year.
And Brett, don't kid us. We know you're going to do Owen Casey. We just know it.
I am
underdog.
I am not necessarily going to designate Owen Casey. We will see there's a lot that can happen in a month.
There is, yeah.
Is Casey eligible for Rising Star?
Casey is absolutely eligible for Rising Star.
There you go.
At least I have to go back and check. I'm pretty sure he is eligible. But I have my Rising Star is not a problem for me because I have a lot of prospects. That's kind of my roster is better situated for that designation than the underdog. But
well, the only prospects that can be kept are prospects taken off of waivers or drafted after second round or later in the preseason draft as rising stars. So it is a more limited pool, but still, I don't think you'll have an issue finding a suitable replacement for Matt McLean. But yeah, I'm very interested to see how the next designations happen with underdog. I don't even know if there's going to be too many rising star designations this year, since so many of the ones that have already been designated as rising stars are unlikely to lose rookie eligibility, notwithstanding Matt McLean. But I think that there's a lot of strategy involved with designated rising stars, trying to get players who will lose rookie eligibility. And I have small regrets that I didn't designate Ezekiel Tovar as my rising star last year. He was my underdog because it would have given me more roster flexibility once he lost designation, and then I could kind of play around with it a bit more.
Yeah, this is going to be when I switch it over. This is going to be my third rising star of the league so far, which I think will be tops among everybody. So I don't get any extra points for that, but there is definitely some strategy to that. That was part of the reason why I designated Adrian Morgan the first time around. It was mostly I didn't love the rest of my options, and it was a little bit of a kick the can down the road scenario because I knew he was probably just a couple months away from losing his eligibility, which he was. So McLean was a better pick.
Yeah, I'll say.
Not even on my roster anymore.
Who wants to? What do you guys got going on at BP? What should people be on the lookout for at Baseball Prospectus right now?
Well, Jesse just updated all his rankings, so that's the big draw. But there's always a lot going on at BP.
Yeah, there's weekly content coming out. The prospect team every Monday has reports from live looks. I know that I just updated my top 500 dynasty rankings and top 500 dynasty prospect rankings on the 5th and 12th, and they are not going to get updated again until mid-June. But in the coming weeks, I'll be looking at prospects. This coming week, I'm going to be running up with some pitching prospects in AAA and Low A. Then I'll be doing hitting prospects and dynasty risers after that. And we're getting very close to Major League Draft. So I think a lot of what we do.
I'm excited.
Yeah, we're going to be doing a lot of prep for it. It's a very top-heavy draft class, but a lot of very talented players at the top of that class. And I believe, Brett, you have Dylan Cruz on your roster, don't you?
I have two of my favorite bats from this draft class on my roster, and I do have Dylan Cruz, yes. But I think he's the clear number one guy in this draft. And I know this is not a 2023 draft podcast. But I am extremely excited about the other 2023 draft pick I have on my roster, which is the fast rising prep shortstop Arjun Nimala out of Florida. He is fun to watch.
Man,
he's going to be someone I fight you a lot on, Jesse, when we do our post draft rankings.
I'm sure.
Can't believe you're rostering a prep hitter in the Highlander. That's above my pay grade.
He was my last draft pick this offseason.
All right, guys. Well, this was a lot of fun. Thanks again to Brett for creating this league and joining us, and thank you, Jesse, for co-hosting with me. Really appreciate it, guys. This has been the RotoWire Prospect Podcast, brought to you by Rival Fantasy. I'll be updating my prospect rankings next Thursday, so be on the lookout for that. Be back next week.